Hi, my name is Daria Mesensova and welcome to Politeka World Show. In today's show, we will talk about the following. Retake of Donbas and Crimea. Why this counteroffensive could be much more complicated than it was with Kharkiv and Kherson. Military aid to Ukraine. When USA will increase it and meet the needs of Ukrainian military forces. Sanctions against Russia. Will they work or not? We will talk about it with the regional director of IRI. With us today is Stephen Nix. Hi, Stephen.
Добрий день, пані Дар'я, і слава Україні.
Yeah, героям слава. So let's start our discussion from the situation on the battlefield. And there are some experts who held the discussions that it will be really more difficult to retake Crimea and Donbas than it was with Kharkiv and Kherson. What do you expect from this counter-attack from Ukrainian military forces?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to say the Ukrainian armed forces are winning this war, and they are performing admirably. As to these experts that you're citing, Daria, let's go back to February, when many of these so-called experts were predicting that Kiev would fall within 48 hours of the attack. They were wrong. I argued against many of these experts on cable television in the United States because I'd been to the front in Donbas. I'd been to the Crimean front. I spoke with the young men of the armed forces of Ukraine, and I came away with the impression they would stand, they would fight, and they were willing to give their lives for their country. And that's what we saw played out in the initial stages of the war. That's what we're seeing now. So just because these so-called experts are again making predictions doesn't mean that they are correct. In fact, I disagree. I think that Ukraine is in a position to launch additional counteroffensives, both in the south and in the east. That's what I expect to happen.
What do you think? Why they were so foolish? Maybe it's the reason that they don't know much Ukraine and Ukrainians?
That's exactly right. What these so-called experts were relying on is spreadsheets of weapons, of armor, of aircraft, of personnel. They didn't take into account the determination and the will and the courage of Ukrainians to stand and fight for their country. And that's what they got wrong. And that's why I don't agree with these predictions about the current situation of the battlefield. I'm fully confident that Ukraine will press forward and will be successful and achieve President Zelenskyy's stated goal of reclaiming Crimea and Donbas.
Yeah, and also there is one more thing that we could hear even now in Ukraine, so that a lot of people who wanted to leave Donbas, they fled or been chased out, for example. Or if we're talking the same about Crimea. So don't you think that we could encounter some partisan resistance from pro-Russian, or it's more Russian narratives that are spreading around?
My assessment is those citizens living in the occupied territories are discouraged. They see the lack of progress on the Russian side. Let's remember what the president of the Russian Federation, I refuse to say his name, but the president of the Russian Federation promised his people first, that Kiev would fall in 3 days. Second, that Odessa would be taken. Third, there would be retaking of all of the territories in Donbas. None of those things have happened. So the Russian people within Russia and those residing in the occupied territories are starting to have doubts. And that's the one thing that the Kremlin fears, is when the people start to doubt the powers that be.
Yeah, and also there is one more thing. Some military representatives of Ukrainian military forces or military experts, they urge that if they could receive more heavy weapons, yes, they could advance far more and quicker and gain the territories much more, and the speed will be the other, yeah. So, and on the other hand, we could hear that USA talk about de-escalation. They don't want escalation. What do you make of it? Yeah.
The United States and the European allies have to stand behind Ukraine and provide additional weapons. This will end the war sooner. It will save lives, and it's the right thing to do. So again, there have been some commentary in the United States and other places about negotiations. I can tell you that based on IRI polling, we've done several polls that we briefed Zelenskiy team on, which indicate that the Ukrainian people, the majority of Ukrainian people, do not want to make any territorial concessions. And in fact, when we asked in the poll, what does victory mean to you? The vast majority of Ukrainian citizens say a return to the borders of 1991 with all that that implies. So again, if decisions are going to be made on public opinion, it's very clear what the Ukrainian armed forces have to do and what the West has to do to support this effort. And that is to retake all of the lands currently occupied by Russia. And that's going to require additional weaponry. So our understanding is that our Congress, the current Congress, the outgoing one, is going to consider a supplemental aid package to Ukraine, estimates as large as $38 billion. This is very important. And so we're supportive of this. In fact, IRI is sponsoring a Ukrainian delegation here next week, led by David Arakamia, that will give updates to members of Congress on the battlefield and also make sure that Congress understands why Ukraine needs this assistance. And then there are two members of the delegation that are members of the newly formed Rada Committee on Oversight of International Assistance. And so the idea is that they will provide assurances to members of Congress in Washington that assistance is going where it needs to be, that there's proper measures in place to audit and account for this assistance.
But still, why USA so cautious, and why they don't want escalation? Do you believe that if USA sent more weapons, ammunition, and heavy weapons, what we are asking for a long time, there will be much more bombarding of Ukraine?
No, I don't. I believe the opposite, that we have to do more. We have to call the bluff of the Kremlin and push forward. The United States needs to provide additional arms to Ukraine and do it quickly. And what that means is air defense systems, the HIMARS, that means armor, that means F-15, F-16 aircraft. All of these things will be essential to allow Ukraine to continue its counteroffensive and retake territories that belong to Ukraine.
Oh, what do you think? Could we expect for such weapons you account in future? I mean, in winter, because we know that winter could be hard from one side and from another.
Well, yes. Again, this package, if it's voted on in this current Congress, will take place during this calendar year. The expectation then is that the assistance would be moved quickly to Ukraine to help during the winter. And I'll also note the importance of winter gear to provide Ukrainian troops with the winter clothing and equipment that they need to conduct combat operations in cold weather. That is being delivered both from the United States and from our European allies. So in my assessment, the Ukrainian armed forces are going to be better equipped to withstand the elements of winter than their Russian counterparts. Again, General Zelenskyy is in constant contact with his counterparts in the United States. There is a lot of communication between our Congress and the Rada. That's one of the reasons we're bringing this delegation to Washington. So there's a very good information flow, and I think a good understanding on the U.S. side of what the needs are. We just need to provide more and need to provide it more quickly.
Yeah, but what do you make of the developments in Taiwan? I heard from some Americans. They told me when the war started in Ukraine, they became very worried about Taiwan and all these developments between China and USA. Do you expect something in this area?
Well, again, it's difficult to predict, but we believe that China is certainly watching the West's reaction to Russia's invasion, see how we react, see what we do. That's all part of China's calculation, which is another reason why the West has to stand firmly behind Ukraine during this war, because it signals to China that the West is ready to stand upon principles of territorial integrity. So very, very important that we stand by Ukraine and send this strong signal to China that any move on Taiwan would be met with force.
So what is the main factor? I didn't get the answer. Why you think they are so slow? It's political, the main factor. They don't want to die the death of Russia quickly, or what else? What is your point of view?
Well, I think it goes to what you said, Daria, earlier, is perhaps a fear of escalation, which I discount completely. Russia has made many threats in the course of this war, hasn't lived up to them. I think that these fears of escalation are unfounded. I don't assess that Russia would follow through on this veiled threat to use nuclear weapons or any of the other threats that they have made to escalate the war. So we have to confront these threats, dismiss them, and press forward. But I think that's the heart of the hesitation on the part of some, is a fear of escalation, which again, I believe is unfounded.
So it's a fear of nuclear war that could be started. What's the escalation they are thinking about?
It could be nuclear war. It could be the spread of the war to NATO countries like Poland, like Lithuania. So again, it's a fear of broadening the war, as well as a fear of the use of nuclear weapons, whether those are tactical weapons or other types of weapons. So yes, but again, I assess that these fears are unfounded, that if we press forward with assistance, Ukraine makes gains, the Kremlin is not going to follow up on these threats.
But in my opinion, I think if they want to assist us as much as possible, there will be another side, so they could escalate because Ukraine won't have enough power to win this war. So did you get it? Yeah. So
well, I think Ukraine does have the power to win this war if they receive additional assistance from the West. That's the key to victory. You've got Ukrainian army fighting valorously, tremendously, bravely, and making gains. But they need military assistance from the West. They need modern NATO-level weapons to win this war. If they get these weapons, they will prevail. And I'll go as far as saying that Ukraine is showing the world how to fight Russians. So at the conclusion of this war, when Ukraine is triumphant, victorious, Ukraine will be in a position to offer training to NATO on how to confront the Russian military.
Yeah, and if we draw the parallels between Britain in 1940 and Ukraine, many international Ukrainian experts measure that these two historical wars are very similar. What do you make of it? Do you agree that we could compare these two wars?
I think it's difficult to make that analogy. That's my assessment. I think it's a different set of facts. But the point is that where there is a direct connection is you've got one country taking on a huge adversary and prevailing. And so like Great Britain during World War II, I believe that Ukraine will prevail in this contest.
Yeah, and in that time, we understand that Great Britain had Churchill, who made a lot of important decisions for his country and for Europe. And today, in the whole world, I mean, in USA and the other countries, we don't have as I could understand, such person like Churchill and so on, so on. Or you could see that someone from political leaders in the world could make some decisions like that.
Well, I think that the comparisons drawn between wartime President Churchill and wartime President Zelensky are appropriate. It's very clear that Zelensky has demonstrated bravery, leadership, and the people have rallied around that. IRI survey data tells us that the president has a 94% approval rating. It's unheard of. And we've never had any politician, any leader in any IRI poll have such strong ratings. So this is really underlines the way that the Ukrainian people have rallied around this wartime president and really stepped in line with his leadership. So I think President Zelensky has done an outstanding job, and the people are supporting him. And that's very, very important in terms of the ultimate outcome, which is victory for Ukraine.
In Ukraine, experts tell that U.S. Don't have a strategy in context of the end of the war in Ukraine. What is your opinion of what USA wanted from it?
Well, I think the United States should desire what the Ukrainian people desire, which, as I said earlier, means a complete withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine and a return to the borders of 1991. That's the end game for the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian government, and should be the end game and objective of the West as well. Which is why any discussion of negotiations right now is premature and unfounded. Any negotiations will only give the Kremlin time to rearm, resupply, and prepare for another attack on Ukraine. So my viewpoint is negotiations are nonsensical at this point. They don't make any sense. There's no logic. Ukraine needs to press forward on the gains that it has made and end this war as quickly as possible.
And if you are talking about denuclearization of Russia, so one of the points we would like to ask Russia if the negotiation could take part, we would like ask about it, denuclearization. Does this will work? What do you feel about it?
Denuclearization, again, that's such a far off topic. My focus would be on ejecting all Russian presence from Ukraine and then pressing Russia to make reparations to pay for the massive destruction, the billions of dollars of destruction that it has wrought upon Ukraine. So I think that's the most important point that needs to be pursued by a victorious Ukraine is reparations. Russia must pay for the damage it has done to Ukraine.
What do you think about the work of sanctions against Russia? So we know that the most important sanctions will work in December, in January. I'm talking about embargo. But still, we know the new initiatives from European Union. They want to even to involve the criminal responsibility if some countries who have relations with Russia, they will be punished, criminally. So do you expect that these new things will be involved in the practice of sanctions?
Well, what we're seeing in sanctions is they are having the desired effect. But we need more. We need both sectoral sanctions. We need more individual sanctions. What I found very promising was the recent decision of the U.S. to sanction European countries that were contributing to not just Nord Stream 2, but to the provision of technology to Russia that could be used for wartime purposes. So this is a very important development that companies in Europe are now being sanctioned This will deprive Russia even further from trying to gain the components it needs for arms, technology. So we hope that there will be an expansion of such sanctions so that any company in Europe would be fearful of being sanctioned and would have no business dealings with the Russian Federation. Very, very important. Arms and sanctions, twofold, will end this war.
Well, what is your point of view on criminal responsibility if any countries will have some trade relations with Russia?
Well, in terms of criminal responsibility, I'd like to focus really on an international tribunal. There is a second Ukrainian delegation here next week. We are bringing a group of members of the Rada, but there's a second delegation in town composed of officials from the parliament, from the executive branch, the foreign ministry, the office of the president, which is going to argue for the creation of an international tribunal to prosecute individuals for war crimes. And again, this is an important element. Once Ukraine prevails in this conflict, the goal should be twofold. One is reparations, so that Russia will have to pay for the damage it has wrought, as I said earlier. The second is criminal prosecution of individuals for violations of human rights and war crimes, which Ukraine is gathering massive amounts of evidence to support such a case. So whenever this war ends, Ukraine will have a very detailed record of war crimes. And I think we'll be able to successfully prosecute individuals for their role in all of the war crimes, horrible crimes that have been committed against the Ukrainian people. So it's very, very important for this tribunal to be established and then to take shape and do its work.
Yeah, but do you expect any moves from China regarding help to Russia? As we read before in media, there were some airplanes, Russian airplanes from China to Russia, and there were videos with the ammunition they sent to Russia. So, do you expect of acceleration of this help?
I really don't. My viewpoint on China about this war is very simple. China is focused primarily on markets, on trade, on financial matters. That's what its goal is. It wants to compete economically. Wars and conflict interfere with that construct. So my assessment is China is very unhappy with this war because wars interfere with commerce, with trade, with stabilness. And in order for China to successfully build its economy, they need stability throughout the world. So my view is that they take a very dim outlook on this war. They are not happy with it. They've not taken steps to restrain Russia or to get involved in sanctions. However, my viewpoint is the Chinese want this war to end quickly, not for any utopian reasons, but because it interferes with commerce and trade, which is their primary objective.
But what is bad for them? They have the gas goes across them. I mean, so Europe receives the gas from China. Then I thought they are really interested in diminish Russia. So they will be more important in the world, in the whole trade story, and so on, so on.
Well, let's remember, people talk a lot about the Chinese-Russian relationship. But let's remind ourselves that in this relationship, Russia will always be the junior partner.
Yeah.
It's dependent on China. China is not dependent on Russia. So when it becomes convenient for Russia to part ways with Russia in this close relationship, China will do this, and they'll do it for economic reasons, not necessarily for political reasons. But whenever Russia is no longer dispensable to China's growing economy, the partnership will continue to deteriorate. Right now, yes, as you point out, gas flows continue. China is purchasing Russian national resources. But again, there'll be other sources for China to draw from in the future. So I don't see anything but a very dim future, dim prospects for this Russia-Chinese relationship.
Yeah, but where they lose from the war in Ukraine, China? Everywhere we could see that they get a lot of benefits in contrast.
Well, again, as I pointed out, they're getting benefits from cheap oil and gas. But looking at the larger picture, this war is disrupting trade relations, trade routes, in general, international commerce. And that interferes and obstructs with China's strategy of global financial transactions, global trade, market economy, and expansion of the Chinese economy. So again, China is not interested in this war being prolonged. They would like to see it end. So my hope is that as the war continues, Ukraine continues to successfully push back Russia, that China will be emboldened to take further steps to limit its relationship with the Russian Federation.
Understood. Yeah. And if we are talking about Belarus engagement, do you expect that Belarus could take part with their army in Ukrainian war?
No, absolutely not. Lukashenko does not want to be part of this war because his people don't want to be part of this war.
But people don't want even Lukashenko, but they live with it.
Well, they're forced to. This is a very, very, very...
There they could be forced also. So I hear the statistics that around 30,000 or 14,000 people from Belarus, they're ready to fight with Russia for money.
I don't believe it. I think that Lukashenko realizes if he enters this war in a real way, not the supportive role that Belarus is playing, but sending troops to fight is against public opinion in Belarus. There is reliable polling data that shows that people are overwhelmingly against Belarus's participation in this war. So Lukashenko has his own polling data that tells him this. He understands that his people are against this. I think he's resisting pressure from the Kremlin to engage more directly in this war because his people won't stand for it. I truly believe Lukashenko knows that if he allows Russia to Belarus to actively participate in this war, that's the end of his regime. He will no longer be in power.
Yeah, good answer. And the last but not the least, Stefan, what is your opinion for the Crimea? How difficult will be retake of Crimea? We could hear from Ukrainian officials that it could be happened in 4 months, 5 months. Do you expect such a scenario?
It's difficult to predict. I would just characterize it this way. For the last 9 months, Ukraine is achieving what others have thought is impossible. So applying this to Crimea, I think that Ukraine will continue to do the impossible and has the capacity to retake Crimea, but that is dependent on continued and expanded Western military assistance to Ukraine. But I'm very confident with the proper weaponry that Ukraine will retake Crimea.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan, for this interview. It was really fruitful talk.
Буде дуже приємно. Дякую. І слава Україні, і смерть ворогам.
Yeah. Героям слава.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.